Welcome to Minhag Dirigo, a Jewish meme podcast. And this week we're continuing our series called Artificially Intelligent, which is we're talking about the intersection of artificial intelligence and Judaism. And the first two podcasts were more explanatory. This one's going to start getting into the Jewish ethics of AI from a very, very top level generalist kind of sphere. And I'm going to start with a very, very simple observation. Artificial intelligence is often treated as a technological question, but Judaism tends to treat technology as an ethical amplifier. The real question usually isn't what AI can do, but what does it do to human responsibility? What about dignity? What about honesty? Jewish ethics historically deal with tools that expand human capability. We have huge treatments in our tradition on money, on writing. In the medieval era, the emergence of the printing press and automation. And in our case, artificial intelligence is simply the latest amplification of human creativity and power. But let's go back to Talmud Bavli, Sanhedrin 65b. The text says, Rava created a man, and this is kind of a general discussion of necromancy and some other things. He sent him to Rabbi Zerah. Rabbi Zerah spoke to him, but he did not answer. So Rabbi Zerah said, "You were created by the sages, return to your dust." The passage is astonishing on a certain level because it describes what we might call a proto-artificial human. And I kind of like the key ethical insight we find in this is that Rabbi Zerah identifies the being as artificial because it cannot speak and it lacks genuine human responsiveness. Speech in rabbinic thought represents moral consciousness and relational capacity. So intelligence without moral presence to the rabbis was not fully human. And this I cannot talk. It parallels a lot of modern artificial intelligence concerns because while artificial intelligence can produce language, it doesn't possess any kind of conscious moral responsibility. Artificial intelligence may mimic human capability, but it does not possess human dignity or accountability. So Rabbi Zerah might tell it to return to the dust. Early Jewish mystical traditions claimed that righteous sages could create beings using the divine creative language described in the Sefer Yetzirah. Later texts say certain rabbis created animals, created artificial servants, temporarily animated beings through sacred knowledge. These stories aren't necessarily technological instruction, but they are ethical thought experiments about the limits of creative power and humans' ability to make man. And it's the same story we find writ large in the Frankenstein book and other places. The deeper message, anything we talk about cloning or creating robots, human beings created in the image of God possess the ability to imitate divine creation. But with that power, if you'll pardon any the Marvel Cinematic Universe or Spider-Man fandom amongst us, with that power comes great responsibility. And in modern terms, AI represents yet another form of human participation in creative power. How far should imitation of divine creativity go? The most famous Jewish artificial creation story, of course, that we all know is the Golem of Prague, associated with the 16th century Rabbi Judah Loew ben Bezalel, the Maharal of Prague. According to the legend, the Maharal created a clay figure. He animated it using a sacred Hebrew letter, or letters, often the word emet, truth, written on its forehead. And the golem was created principally to protect the Jewish community from persecution. But eventually the golem becomes dangerous or uncontrollable, and the Maharal had to deactivate it by removing the first letter of emet, leaving met, dead. The golem narrative is powerful because it captures several ethical concerns that sound remarkably modern. The golem has strength, but it lacks judgment. It can't discern right and wrong on its own. It cannot look upon things and know that they're good. And it follows instructions literally. And this resembles the modern concern with AI to a certain degree with systems that execute tasks efficiently but lack contextual understanding or ethical judgment. And one of the things that we're seeing as these models evolve is that with the right training data, they can start mimicking human behavior. But the problem is, and this comes in what we talked about with AI alignment in our last podcast, is that a large language model on any model has no intrinsic ability to discern right from wrong. So it models its understanding of right and wrong by a combination of what's in the training data and how humans predictably behave, because it's an algorithmic prediction model, or the parameters set by the engineers that are developing it. And that's why, the versions of the story of the Golem of Prague and any other Golem story end with it growing too powerful or behaving very unpredictably. So humans can create powerful systems that they struggle to control. And, this is very similar to modern concerns about runaway automation or the paperclip theory or poorly aligned AI systems. Even though the golem looks human, Jewish tradition consistently insists that it does not possess a soul, it cannot truly speak, and it can't participate in human moral existence. In some versions, the golem cannot form meaningful language, but again, for the rabbis, speech represented human moral agency. Taken together, these traditions suggest a couple of different Jewish insights. Humans are creative beings. Judaism does not reject artificial creation. It has its place, but that human creativity has to reflect B'Tselem Elohim, being created in the divine image. And innovation is not inherently problematic. It's what we do with it. But I mean, circles back to this, like uh, what we're talking about here. Artificial intelligence does not yet and cannot yet possess any kind of real moral intelligence. The Talmudic artificial man lacks speech. The golem lacks judgment. These traditions warn that simulated intelligence is not the same as moral consciousness. And ultimately, the golem must be shut down and shoved in the attic of the old synagogue in Prague. And Jewish tradition repeatedly warns that human technological power must be bounded by ethics. Now, another top level concern we have about artificial intelligence is, it's right in the Ten Commandments, Exodus 20:13, uh, Deuteronomy 5:17, Lo tignov, you shall not steal. In rabbinic interpretation, this very often, as things are wont to do in Judaism, this extends beyond physical theft to include genivat da'at, that's deception or misrepresentation, taking credit for someone else's work, intellectual dishonesty. In fact, in Pirkei Avot 6:6, we have this emphasis: one who says something in the name of the one who said it brings redemption to the world. So attribution is a moral obligation, and it's not just an academic courtesy. And why artificial intelligence raises this problem for us, one of the things a couple of months ago, there was an interesting article in the Washington Post about why rabbis should use AI to generate sermons, which only highlighted a high degree of ignorance about artificial intelligence on the part of that rabbi. And it's fine. I mean, it's not judgmental, but large language models are trained using massive data sets of human writing and other products. The system learns statistical patterns in language, and then it generates text that resembles what has been seen before, because that's how it works. It is very common for this certain turn of phrase to be made. And so that turn of phrase, the more common it is, the more likely that's what's going to be produced by a large language model. So, it's not looking up data, it's taking the data it's been trained on and it's putting it together in a predictive manner. It's an algorithmic manner. So it's not just copying and pasting per se, but it does derive from the corpus of human creativity. And the more niche you get, like Safaria, if you're training it on Safaria data, if you're training it on any of the rabbinical texts, you are invariably, which aren't as numerous per se as the body of human work out there, you are still deriving that work from other people. Yeah, AI text is a distillation of many human voices, even when no specific citation appears. If a rabbi, a writer, or a teacher presents AI generated material as entirely their own work, the audience then also assumes that the ideas came from the speaker. And that's not cool. If I go to and sit down at ChatGPT and say, "Here, I'm going to enter a prompt. I need a sermon. This is the parsha for this week. I need a sermon on this stat." They're not even starting with the idea. And sometimes that's okay. Maybe you could say, "Hey, give me some ideas for a sermon." And that's okay because then you can do your own work. But the content is definitely partly derived from the collective intellectual work of others. And that creates a definite possible violation of Jewish law. So why many rabbis do argue that you shouldn't use AI, and our own rabbi at Congregation Beth Israel is one of them. It's not necessarily because AI is forbidden, but a sermon also represents a personal Torah. Uh, this is your lived experience as a rabbi. This is your training. This is your education. This is your continued work in the field speaking. It should reflect your wrestling with the text. You turn it over and over. You're the one that looks at it. And delegating that intellectual labor to artificial intelligence, it risks intellectual dishonesty and weakening authentic teaching. As I said, the better use for it, brainstorming, coming up with some ideas. I need about, take me through to the high holy days. I need some ideas for sermons. And then you do the research or outlining. It can help you outline your stuff very well, and it can help you edit. It can help you, like I use Copilot and Word extensively to make sure that I'm not repeating myself, just as I used to use the old grammar tools on my, I don't have it here, but my 1980s era Mac with Word 4.0 or whatever, the grammatical tools, the thesaurus, all that stuff. This stuff has been with us for quite some time, and that's fine. And ChatGPT and some of these other tools do it a lot better, but you don't outsource the core interpretive work to AI. Don't. And I think we've hit that enough. You know, the Talmud spends a great deal of time talking about human dignity. And I just go back to all of the things about the tents, Matovu, Aleka Yaakov, Ohaleka Yaakov, the tents, how lovely are your tents. In the Talmud and in Midrash, one of the reasons we understand that the tents were so lovely is because the doors were not facing each other, so that the openings uh, kept people from violating each other's privacy. Kavod habriot, human dignity, so very important. Uh, and it all does come back to Bereshit. Humanity is created, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and from this comes the concept of Kavod habriot, the human dignity. The Talmud even teaches that human dignity can override certain rabbinic prohibitions. So, what risks does artificial intelligence pose to human dignity? Well, I'm not going to touch on them in great detail because there's some future podcasts I want to do specifically about healthcare AI. But when it comes to replacing human judgment, one of the first examples I gave in this series was the work we did for the Pennsylvania justice system that was never really used. It wasn't with large language models per se, but it was definitely using machine learning and criminal sentencing and what the data revealed to us. But replacing human judgment, when you have machines used to make decisions about healthcare, employment, policing, the justice system, welfare eligibility, we risk reducing human beings to data points rather than persons. And I will attend to this further in an entire podcast about AI in healthcare. But one of the biggest emerging uses of artificial intelligence in healthcare right now is looking at population health. And in that case, population health is looking at a segment of the population, be it a certain demographic or a certain region, and saying, these are healthcare trends intrinsic to this. Like if I'm looking at certain regions of Kentucky and West Virginia, I might say, oh gosh, these people are at higher risk of things associated with the tradition of coal mine working. If I Three Mile Island, it's vastly overstated what the radiation leak did. You were more likely to have higher concentrations of radon in central Pennsylvania, like higher sources of background radiation than anything TMI released. But population health and artificial intelligence combinations lets you identify greater risks for things associated with an irradiated population. Uh, the work I did was mostly centered around, and most recently was centered around chronic kidney disease. Huge segments of our population, especially people that are impoverished, are at higher risk because of diet and other reasons for chronic kidney disease. And population health lets you identify that. It's really, really helpful. But again, it's still reducing people to numbers. A human life cannot be reduced to an algorithmic score, according to our Jewish tradition. And that's one of the things that we have to bring to the table as theologians, as Jews, as humans to the equation when we're talking about the implementation of AI. And that does lead to the next piece is with dehumanization through automation. If artificial intelligence replaces meaningful human work entirely, we risk a loss of purpose, a loss of agency, treating people as economically disposable. Jewish thought has always valued work as dignity, not just productivity. Think about it. Pirkei Avot also says, well, the reward is equivalent to the work. Well, if you're not working, what reward can you possibly earn? It's just we place so much emphasis on labor and work in our tradition, being paid fairly, and all those things. The more we automate, the more we take away people's livelihoods, the more we take away their dignity. So there has to be a balance. It's very important. I think it's great for it democratizes a lot of businesses to be able to reduce human dependencies, and I'm guilty of automating my share of jobs away over the course of a 30-year career. But on the other end of that, you know, if every if nobody is capable of earning an income, we've completely killed and bottomed out the low skilled labor market. And low skilled, that's not saying these people are, you know, insufficient as human beings or anything. It just means that they don't have specialized work skills. Nothing wrong with that. But we don't have a place for them in the labor market. My grandmother, fresh out of high school during World War II, went to work for the Hamilton Watch Company in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. That job does not exist today because of automation and robotics. We've taken away a lot of dignified career paths for people and reduced them to saying, "Hey, all you're good for is working in fast food," and we're even automating that. It's not great, and I think that's something we have to consider. The next one is the next concern from an ethical perspective for us is deep fakes and identity theft. We know right now that artificial intelligence can fabricate voices to really high degree of similarity. Um, my former high school classmate and former NPR morning edition host David Green is suing right now because he heard his voice approximated with AI and available for people to use to generate AI videos. David has a very distinctive, great radio voice. That's awful. I mean, and we also know that AI can fabricate images and videos very, really authentically now. We're gone are the days at this point where you're going to find extra digits and other little distortion giveaways. It's really, really advancing quickly. And it can fabricate whole identities. This directly threatens human dignity because it appropriates a person's image and voice without consent. Jewish law historically protects this under principles like hezekreya, harm through exposure, dignity of reputation, and again, deception. One of the other areas that I need to cover is artificial intelligence creates kind of a moral distance. It's a very subtle danger, but it's one that I'm constantly observing. If you go on LinkedIn right now, maybe it's just my field in engineering and whatever, but you see a lot of AI generated content on LinkedIn. And what I'm seeing is that AI is creating a lot of distance between the actor, the consumer, and the act. instead of writing something harmful, someone prompts a machine to do it. Instead of writing a huge expose of something, they're having AI do it. Jewish ethics tends to reject this kind of distancing. There's a comparable idea in halacha, sheliach lidvar avera. You can't avoid responsibility by delegating wrongdoing. It's probably the same reason that, my rabbi and myself and others object to the idea of a Shabbos goy. Even if a tool or a person performs the act, the human remains morally responsible for what happens. It's why we're so careful. You can't. A lot of people make this mistake. We have a non-Jewish person that comes in and works in our kitchen at synagogue. You can't directly ask her to turn on the stove on Shabbat because you can't willfully ask somebody to violate Shabbat on your behalf, whether they're a Gentile or a Jew. That's a no-go. What you can do is say, "Boy, it sure would be nice if that oven would be on." And some people don't even like that. I certainly don't. But it's a more pleasant way of putting it. But I can't commission someone to kidnap someone for me and avoid moral accountability for that. I can't hire a, a a professional killer to take out somebody I don't like and not be accountable for that. And we have to be mindful that artificial intelligence enables us to do the same thing. It's also making, there are recent studies that are showing that continual use of chat GPT on the part of students and teachers and others is making us collectively dumber. We don't have to build the connective theoretical tissue between concepts if we're using AI. We just lean on the machinery to do it for us. Those synapses in our brain aren't firing. We're not going off on exploring our own tangents or anything like that. It's AI is building all the connective tissue for us, and that's not good. So we're not just creating moral distance, but we're also creating intellectual distance. There is a positive Jewish view of technology. Judaism is definitely not anti-technology. You might get that impression from some of our sects, but 90% of us worldwide are very pro technology. We're constantly trying to find ways to make it work with Torah. The conservative movement's rabbinical assembly released a teshuva. That's when they release a decision about what's right and wrong and what's appropriate under Jewish law. They did one about the use of electric cars on Shabbos. And these we're definitely always looking to find ways to reconcile with our belief systems. And human creativity itself reflects the divine image, as we've already said. The Talmud praises human ingenuity, and so there are ethical questions that, you know, should we be building AI? I don't think so. I always think that we should be asking about AI. How is it helping us fulfill our responsibilities to each other? I love using AI in healthcare. We are broadening access to care, broadening diagnosis in ways that, because of the small funnel of actual specialists in the fields, a lot of people just can't get treatment. Well, we're enabling AI to come up with diagnostics if it's done well. We talked about some of the spectacular failures like IBM's Watson for oncology. But some of the work I've done has been really groundbreaking in both cardiac rhythm management and chronic kidney disease prediction. You just need somebody's medical record and hope that you've got all the latest A1Cs and EKGs and everything that you need to make diagnostics. But we can supplement our healthcare system in big ways with this, and that's helping us fulfill our responsibilities to each other. Our rabbi did a great segment on the use of AI to mimic a dead loved one. Jury's out for me on that. I'm all for capitalism and that those things, believe me, are designed solely with a profit motive. And Judaism has a lot to say about that. And I think that we could even go back to some of the treatments on necromancy and Talmud. But it may have therapeutic uses. But the underlying problem for me is the profit motive. And granted, what I've done in health technology also has a profit motive, but it also has enough of a clinical use, a human supporting use, a pikuach nefesh, if you will, like kind of piece to it that I feel okay about it. But simulating a dead loved one, we don't know yet if that's helping people navigate grief. I suspect it won't. I think it avoids it. So if I think that we at the by the end of this podcast, and I'm keeping it short deliberately because these are weighty topics, and I'm going to link some things on both the website and the YouTube version of this, so you have some further reading on each of these topics, both Jewishly and secularly. But I think we should set for ourselves a guideline summary. This is how you use artificial intelligence uh, Jewishly and ethically. So, number one, honesty. Do not present machine generated ideas. If you're looking at Suno or some other things, music, uh, imagery, do not present that purely as your own. Indicate what you generated. Some of the media platforms are forcing you to do this anyway, and they will take your content down if you don't identify it. But do not pass off machine generated stuff as yours. Number two, attribution. Recognize the human intellectual ecosystem behind the AI outputs. Especially in Jewish thought, we from the Tosefta to the Mishnah to the Rishalmi to the Bavli, all the way through Rashi and Rambam and Rashbam, make sure that you're quoting and naming the teachers. Name your teachers. Number three, put human dignity first. Never allow automation to override respect for a person. If you feel like your use of AI is going to come at the expense of another human being, it is not a valid use of AI Jewishly. For responsibility has to remain human. No matter how much artificial intelligence seems to mimic moral accountability, it does not possess it. And so you lay the faults that you find with AI or the use of the AI at the feet of the user or the engineers involved. If Grok turns into Mecha Hitler, don't blame Grok. Blame the engineers behind Grok. Blame the people using Grok. 5. Technology should deepen Torah, not replace it. Artificial intelligence can assist your thinking, it can be a training aid, but it should not be a substitute for human moral and spiritual struggle. If you are having a moral dilemma, do not go to ChatGPT and say, should I? Turn to a local Orthodox rabbi, turn to your local conservative or reform rabbi. Just find a group of Jewish friends. If you're a Christian, talk to a Christian. But the bottom line is, do not go to ChatGPT and look, or Claude, or any of the offerings, and turn to it for moral or spiritual guidance. Artificial intelligence may be trained on human knowledge, but ethics still must be trained on human responsibility. The Torah never imagined neural networks, but it did imagine a world where humans must decide how to use power responsibly. And that's our charge. So next week, or maybe not next week, but 2 weeks from now, I think we're going to get into AI in healthcare and what that means from a Jewish perspective. And then I'm going to try and do a live question and answer session about artificial intelligence in the near future. If you have any questions, please email us, visit us on Facebook or YouTube, leave some comments. Let us know what you'd like to talk about with artificial intelligence, what you'd like to know, and we'll try to address that. I'd like to thank you for joining us. Tune in next week and every week for a new Minhag Dirigo podcast. Thank you.